What would you do if you had nothing left to give, but someone needed help even more than you? Today I'm going to tell you a story that will restore your faith in humanity and show you that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. This is the true story of Emma Martinez, a young woman whose heart was bigger than any challenge life threw at her. Emma was 23 years old when this story takes place, living in downtown Portland, Oregon. She had been aging out of the foster care system just 2 years earlier, and like many young adults in her situation, she found herself struggling to make ends meet. But Emma's story was different from most, not because of her dwarfism, but because of her incredible resilience and the way she chose to see the world. Standing at 3 feet 8 inches tall, Emma had learned early in life that people would often see her physical difference before they saw her brilliant mind or generous heart. She had spent her childhood moving from one foster home to another, never quite finding that permanent family she dreamed of. Some families were kind but unprepared for her specific needs, others were simply looking for a different kind of child to adopt. By the time she turned 18, Emma had lived in 14 different homes. But here's what made Emma extraordinary. She never let these experiences make her bitter. Instead, she developed an incredible ability to read people, to understand their struggles, and to offer comfort in ways that seemed almost magical. Her fellow foster children would often come to her with their problems, and somehow, Emma always knew exactly what to say. When Emma aged out of the system, she was determined to make it on her own. She had received her GED and managed to save a small amount of money from various part-time jobs during high school. She found a tiny studio apartment in a converted basement, barely 400 square feet, but it was hers. The rent was $350 a month, which was manageable with her job at a local coffee shop called Morning Brew. Working at Morning Brew wasn't always easy for Emma. The coffee machines were positioned for average-height employees, and she had to use a step stool for almost everything. But Emma was nothing if not adaptable. She had convinced the owner, Mrs. Chen, to give her a chance by demonstrating her incredible memory for customer orders and her natural ability to make people smile, even on their worst days. Emma's co-workers initially didn't know what to expect, but within weeks, she had become the heart of the coffee shop. Customers would specifically wait in her line, not out of curiosity about her height, but because Emma remembered their names, their usual orders, and always asked about their families or their days with genuine interest. She had a gift for making people feel seen and valued. Her manager, Sarah, often said that Emma had increased their customer retention rate by 30% in just 6 months. People didn't just come for coffee anymore. They came for Emma's infectious optimism and the way she could turn a mundane coffee run into a bright spot in their day. Despite her success at work, money was always tight. After rent, utilities, food, and transportation, Emma barely had $20 left each month. She shopped at thrift stores, cooked simple meals at home, and walked everywhere she could to save on bus fare. But Emma never complained. She had learned long ago that complaining didn't change circumstances, but determination and kindness could open doors that seemed permanently closed. Emma had one particular habit that her co-workers found both admirable and concerning. She always bought an extra loaf of bread each week. Not because she ate that much bread, but because she had noticed several homeless individuals who regularly sat outside the coffee shop or near the bus stops on her route home. Every few days, Emma would quietly distribute sandwiches she had made from this extra bread, usually peanut butter and jelly, sometimes with a banana if she had managed to find them on sale. This wasn't something Emma advertised or talked about. Her co-workers only discovered her routine when Sarah happened to see Emma one evening, carefully wrapping sandwiches in napkins and placing them in her backpack. When Sarah asked about it, Emma simply shrugged and said, "Everyone deserves to eat something good, you know?" It was such a simple statement, but it revealed everything about who Emma was at her core. The week our story really begins, Emma was facing a particularly difficult financial situation. Her landlord had informed all tenants that rent would increase by $50 starting the following month. $50 might not seem like much to most people, but for Emma, it represented nearly 2 days' worth of work. She had already cut every possible expense from her budget, and she wasn't sure how she would manage the increase. To make matters worse, Emma had been fighting a persistent cold for over a week, which had forced her to miss 2 shifts at work. Those missing shifts meant her next paycheck would be significantly smaller than usual. She had calculated and recalculated her budget dozens of times, but the numbers didn't lie. She was going to be short on rent, even without the increase. But true to her character, Emma didn't panic or despair. Instead, she started planning. She picked up extra shifts wherever possible, offered to cover for co-workers who needed time off, and even started looking for a second job that she could manage around her coffee shop schedule. Emma had survived much worse than a budget crisis, and she was determined to figure this out. It was a Tuesday evening in late November when everything changed. The weather had turned unusually cold for Portland, with temperatures dropping into the low 30s and a bitter wind that seemed to cut right through even the heaviest coats. Emma was walking home from her shift at Morning Brew, taking her usual route through downtown, when she noticed something that would alter the course of her life forever. The wind was particularly harsh that evening, carrying with it the scent of impending snow and the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. Emma pulled her second-hand wool coat tighter around her shoulders as she walked down Morrison Street, her backpack heavy with the leftover pastries Mrs. Chen had let her take home. It was one of the small perks of her job, day-old muffins and croissants that would otherwise be thrown away. As she approached the corner where she usually turned toward her apartment, Emma noticed a figure huddled against the brick wall of a closed hardware store. At first glance, she assumed it was one of the regular homeless individuals she often encountered on her route home. But something was different about this person. They weren't positioned in one of the usual spots where people typically sought shelter for the night, and there was something about their posture that suggested they weren't accustomed to being on the streets. Emma slowed her pace, her natural instinct to help others overriding her eagerness to get home to her warm apartment. As she got closer, she could see it was an older man, probably in his 60s, wearing what had once been an expensive-looking overcoat but was now torn and stained. His hair was disheveled, and she could see his hands shaking, though whether from cold or something else, she couldn't tell. What struck Emma most was that the man seemed almost surprised to find himself in this situation, as if he couldn't quite believe where he had ended up. Unlike the street veterans she knew, who had developed efficient systems for staying warm and dry, this man seemed lost and unprepared. Emma approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me, sir? Are you all right?" she asked gently, crouching down so she could speak to him at eye level. It was something she had learned to do over the years, meeting people where they were, literally and figuratively. The man looked up, and Emma was struck by his eyes. They were clear and intelligent, but filled with a kind of desperate confusion. I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I think I'm lost." Emma studied his face more carefully. Despite the stubble and the grime, she could see that this wasn't someone who had been living on the streets for long. His confusion seemed genuine, and there was something about his manner of speaking that suggested education and refinement, even in his current state. "When did you last eat something?" Emma asked, settling down beside him despite the cold concrete. She had learned that sometimes the most important thing you could offer someone was your time and attention. The man paused, seeming to think hard about the question. I don't remember. Yesterday. Maybe longer." His uncertainty was heartbreaking, and Emma could see that he was struggling with more than just hunger and cold. Without hesitation, Emma opened her backpack and pulled out the pastries from the coffee shop. "Here," she said, handing him a blueberry muffin. "It's from yesterday, but it's still good. And I have some water if you're thirsty." The man accepted the food with trembling hands, and Emma watched as he ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. She could see tears forming in his eyes, though he tried to hide them. "Thank you," he whispered. "I can't. I don't know how to." He struggled to find words that could express his gratitude. Emma reached into her backpack again and pulled out her emergency loaf of bread, the one she had bought that morning with her last few dollars, planning to make it last the rest of the week until her next paycheck. She had been living on increasingly smaller meals, stretching every dollar, but looking at this man, she knew she couldn't walk away. "Take this too," she said, handing him the entire loaf. "You need it more than I do." The man stared at the bread as if he couldn't believe what was happening. "I can't take this from you," he said. You work hard for your money, I can tell. I can't. Emma smiled, that warm smile that had endeared her to countless customers at Morning Brew. My grandmother used to say that bread shared is never wasted. Besides, I know where to get more tomorrow. It wasn't entirely true. Emma didn't have money for more bread tomorrow, and she wasn't sure when she would. But something about this man's situation touched her deeply. Maybe it was the way he seemed so lost, or maybe it was the intelligence in his eyes that suggested his current circumstances weren't permanent. Whatever it was, Emma felt compelled to help. As the man carefully tucked the bread into his coat, Emma noticed something else. Despite his current appearance, his hands were soft, not calloused from years of physical labor or rough living. His teeth, visible when he smiled his thanks, were well maintained. These small details suggested a story far more complex than simple homelessness. "Is there somewhere you're supposed to be?" Emma asked gently. "Someone who might be looking for you?" The man's expression clouded over, and he pressed his hands against his temples. There might be. But I can't seem to. Everything's so fuzzy. The doctors said it might take time for everything to come back clearly." Emma's heart ached for him. It sounded like he might have suffered some kind of head injury or medical event that had affected his memory. She had encountered people with similar conditions during her time in various foster homes and social services. "Do you have any ID with you?" she asked. "Sometimes that can help trigger memories." The man patted his pockets and shook his head. "Nothing. I woke up 3 days ago in a hospital, and they said someone had found me unconscious in a park. When I was discharged, I had no wallet, no identification, nowhere to go. The social worker gave me some phone numbers to call, but—" He gestured helplessly. Emma felt a surge of anger at a system that could discharge someone in such a vulnerable state with so little support. But she pushed that anger aside and focused on what she could do right now. "Look, I know this might sound strange, but I work at a coffee shop just a few blocks from here," Emma said. "Morning Brew, on 3rd Street. If you come by tomorrow around 7 a.m., before my shift starts, I can buy you a hot meal. Maybe with some food in you and a warm place to sit, you might remember some things more clearly." The man looked at her with something approaching wonder. "You would do that for me? You don't even know me." Emma stood up, brushing off her jeans. "I don't need to know your whole story to know that you're someone who deserves help," she said simply. "Everyone has rough patches. Sometimes we all need someone to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves." As Emma prepared to continue her walk home, the man called out to her. "Wait," he said. "I don't even know your name." Emma turned back and smiled. "I'm Emma. Emma Martinez. And you are?" The man paused, concentrating hard. I think it starts with R. Robert, maybe. Or Richard." He looked frustrated with himself. "I'm sorry, I know that's not very helpful." "That's okay," Emma said. "We'll figure it out. Just remember, Morning Brew, tomorrow at 7. I'll be the short woman with the big smile, and I'll be looking for you." As Emma walked away, she felt a familiar mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. She had just promised to buy breakfast for a stranger when she barely had enough money to feed herself for the rest of the week. But she had also seen something in that man's eyes that reminded her of her own moments of desperation, when the kindness of others had made all the difference. Emma didn't know it yet, but the man she had just helped was about to remember much more than just his name. Emma barely slept that night. Not because she regretted her decision to help the stranger. She never regretted acts of kindness, but because she kept running the numbers in her head. After buying breakfast for the man she hoped to see in the morning, she would have exactly $7.32 to last until her next paycheck, which was still 5 days away. She had become expert at surviving on very little, but even for Emma, this would be challenging. She mentally catalogued the contents of her small refrigerator: a jar of peanut butter with maybe 3 servings left, half a bottle of milk that would expire tomorrow, some instant oatmeal packets, and a few apples that were getting soft. She could make it work. She had to. Emma arrived at Morning Brew 45 minutes early, using her employee key to let herself in. Mrs. Chen trusted her completely and often allowed her to open the shop on busy mornings. Emma started the coffee machines, arranged the pastries in the display case, and kept watching the door for any sign of the man from the night before. At exactly 7 a.m., as Emma was beginning to worry that he wouldn't show up, she saw a familiar figure approaching the window. But something was different. The man walking toward Morning Brew stood straighter, moved with more confidence, and while he was still wearing the same torn overcoat from the night before, he had somehow managed to clean himself up considerably. Emma unlocked the door and welcomed him in with her characteristic warm smile. "Good morning. You look like you're feeling better today." The man nodded, and Emma immediately noticed that his eyes were clearer, more focused. "Emma," he said, and his voice was stronger than it had been the night before. "I've been thinking about you all night. About your kindness. And I've been remembering things." Emma led him to a corner table and gestured for him to sit down. "That's wonderful. Sometimes a good night's rest can make all the difference. What would you like for breakfast? We have excellent pancakes, and the hash browns are really popular." But the man wasn't looking at the menu. He was studying Emma's face with an intensity that was both gratitude and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something important. My name is Robert. Robert Harrison." Emma nodded encouragingly. "That's great that you remembered. See, I told you things would start coming back." Robert shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. I'm Robert Harrison of Harrison Industries. Emma, I'm a very wealthy man." Emma blinked, not immediately processing what he was telling her. Harrison Industries was a name she had heard before. They were one of the largest construction and real estate development companies in the Pacific Northwest. She had seen their signs on building sites all over Portland. "I don't understand," Emma said, sitting down across from him. "If that's true, then how were you?" Robert ran his hands through his hair, which Emma now realized had been expertly cut before whatever had happened to him. 3 weeks ago, I was coming out of a business dinner downtown. I remember walking to my car, and then, nothing. I woke up in the hospital with a severe concussion and no memory of how I got there. The police think I was mugged, but they never found who did it." Emma listened, her mind racing. If this man was telling the truth, then he wasn't just some unfortunate person who had fallen on hard times. But even as the thought occurred to her, she realized it didn't matter. Her decision to help him hadn't been based on who he was or what he could offer her in return. "The doctors said I had something called retrograde amnesia," Robert continued. "I could remember my childhood, my education, general knowledge, but recent events were just gone. When they discharged me, I knew my name but couldn't remember my address, my phone number, or even what my life looked like." "But you're remembering now?" Emma asked. Robert nodded, his eyes brightening. "It started coming back around midnight. Suddenly I could see my office, my assistant Margaret, my house in the hills. Emma, I own a company with over 2,000 employees. I have homes in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. And last night, I was sitting on a sidewalk with nothing, and you gave me your last loaf of bread." Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that this man's suffering might be ending, confusion about what this meant for both of them, and a growing certainty that Robert Harrison was about to try to thank her in ways that would make her uncomfortable. "I'm glad you're remembering," Emma said carefully. "And I hope you can get back to your normal life soon. But Robert, I want you to know that I didn't help you because I expected anything in return. I helped you because you needed help." Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Emma, do you understand what you did? I am worth approximately $47 million. I could have bought any meal in any restaurant in this city. But when I truly needed help, when I was lost and confused and hungry, the only person who stopped to help me was a young woman who gave me her last food." Emma shifted uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," Robert said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Do you know how many people walked past me in those 3 days? Hundreds. People who knew my face from newspaper articles and business profiles, people who could have easily afforded to help, people who had plenty to spare. But they looked at me and saw someone they didn't want to deal with. Emma thought about the busy streets of downtown Portland, about how easy it was to hurry past people in need when you were focused on your own problems. She had to admit that Robert had a point. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped, Robert continued. Not because you had plenty to give, but because you understood what it meant to need. Emma, I've been successful in business for 25 years, and I thought I understood people. But last night, you taught me something I never learned in all my years of negotiations and deals. What's that? Emma asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. You taught me the difference between transactional kindness and real generosity. Most of the charity I've done in my life has been strategic. Tax deductions, public relations, networking opportunities. But what you did for me was different. You sacrificed something you needed for someone you'd never see again, with no possible benefit to yourself. Emma could see where this conversation was heading, and it made her deeply uncomfortable. Robert, I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. What I did was just basic human decency. Robert smiled, and for the first time since Emma had met him, she could see the confident businessman he must have been before his accident. Emma Martinez, I've been in business long enough to recognize exceptional character when I see it. And I've been wealthy long enough to know that money can't buy the kind of heart you have. Emma's co-workers were starting to arrive for the morning shift, and she could see them glancing curiously at the intense conversation happening at the corner table. Sarah, her manager, caught Emma's eye and raised an eyebrow questioningly. I should probably get to work, Emma said, starting to stand up. But Robert gently touched her arm. Emma, please. Just give me 5 more minutes. I have a proposition for you, and I promise it's not charity. It's business. Emma sat back down, intrigued despite herself. What kind of business? Robert's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm she imagined he brought to his most important deals. Emma, in the past 24 hours, I've been thinking about my company, about my life, about what I want to do differently. And I keep coming back to you. I don't understand. Harrison Industries has been successful because we know how to build things. Buildings, developments, infrastructure. But we've never been particularly good at understanding people. Our customer service has always been our weakness, our employee satisfaction scores are mediocre, and frankly, we have a reputation for being cold and corporate. Emma listened, not sure where this was going but fascinated by the transformation in Robert. This was clearly a man who was used to making decisions and taking action. What if I told you that I want to hire you as our new director of human relations? Robert said. Not as a thank you for helping me, but because you have a natural gift for understanding and connecting with people that could revolutionize how my company operates. Emma's mouth fell open. Robert, I work in a coffee shop. I don't have a college degree. I don't know anything about running a department in a major corporation. You know the most important thing, Robert replied. You know how to see people as human beings, not just obstacles or opportunities. You know how to make someone feel valued and heard. Emma, you turned a coffee shop job into customer retention gold. Imagine what you could do with real resources and support. For the first time in her life, Emma found herself truly speechless. The offer was so far beyond anything she had ever imagined that she couldn't even process it properly. But even as part of her mind raced with possibilities, another part remained skeptical. This felt too much like a fairy tale, and Emma had learned long ago that real life rarely worked out like the stories she had loved as a child. Emma stared at Robert for a long moment, her mind trying to process what he had just offered her. A directorial position at a major corporation? Her, a foster kid who had never even been inside a corporate office? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Robert, she said slowly, I need you to understand something about me. I grew up in the foster care system. I've been judged, dismissed, and underestimated my entire life, sometimes because of my background, sometimes because of my height, sometimes just because people make assumptions about what I'm capable of. I've learned to be okay with that, but I won't let someone offer me something I can't actually do just because they feel grateful. Robert nodded, his expression serious. Emma, what if I told you that everything I've observed about you in our brief interactions tells me you're exactly what my company needs? What if I told you that your background isn't a liability, but actually your greatest strength? Emma raised an eyebrow. How do you figure that? Because you understand what it's like to be overlooked, to be judged, to have to prove yourself constantly. Do you know who makes up the majority of my workforce? People who feel invisible in corporate settings. Construction workers, administrative assistants, security guards, maintenance staff, people who are essential to what we do but rarely feel valued or heard. Emma had never thought about it that way, but she could see his point. She did understand what it felt like to be invisible, to be essential but unrecognized. Plus, Robert continued, you've already demonstrated the most important quality for leadership in human relations. The ability to see potential in people that they can't even see in themselves. You looked at me last night and saw someone worth helping, even when I couldn't remember who I was. That's exactly the kind of vision we need. Emma felt a flutter of excitement, but she forced herself to stay practical. Even if that's true, I don't have the education or experience for a position like that. I wouldn't know where to start. That's what training is for, Robert said. Emma, I built a $47 million company by recognizing talent and investing in it. I'm not offering you this position as a favor. I'm offering it because I believe you could genuinely transform how we operate. Sarah appeared beside their table, clearly concerned about Emma missing her shift preparations. Emma, everything okay over here? Emma looked up at her manager, realizing that her entire life might be about to change. Sarah, this is Robert. Robert, this is Sarah, my manager here at Morning Brew. Robert stood and shook Sarah's hand with the confident grip of a successful businessman. Sarah, I've been trying to convince Emma to come work for my company. She's extraordinary at what she does here, and I imagine that's largely thanks to your excellent management. Sarah looked between Emma and Robert, clearly trying to understand what was happening. Emma is definitely our best employee, she said. Our customers love her. But Emma, what's this about a job offer? Emma took a deep breath. Sarah, Robert owns Harrison Industries. He's offering me a position in his company. Sarah's eyes widened. Harrison Industries was one of Portland's most prominent businesses. Emma, that's amazing. But are you qualified for something like that? It was exactly the question Emma had been asking herself, and hearing it from someone else stung a little. But Robert jumped in before Emma could respond. Qualification isn't just about degrees or traditional experience, he said. It's about character, intelligence, and the ability to connect with people. Emma has demonstrated all of those qualities. Everything else can be taught. Emma felt a warm surge of gratitude toward Robert for defending her capabilities, but she also realized that she needed to make this decision based on her own assessment of herself, not on other people's doubts or encouragement. Can I have some time to think about it? Emma asked Robert. This is a huge decision, and I want to make sure I'm making it for the right reasons. Of course, Robert said. But Emma, I want you to know that this offer isn't going to disappear if you take time to consider it. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is my company. Take all the time you need. Emma worked her shift that day in a daze, mechanically taking orders and making coffee while her mind raced with possibilities and doubts. Her co-workers noticed her distraction, and by lunchtime, word had spread throughout the small staff that Emma had received a major job offer. During her break, Emma called the one person she trusted to give her honest advice, her former foster mother, Linda Rodriguez. Linda had taken care of Emma for 2 years when she was 16 and 17, and though Emma had had to leave when Linda's husband got transferred for work, they had maintained a close relationship. Mija, Linda said when Emma explained the situation, this sounds like an incredible opportunity. But I can hear the fear in your voice. What if I'm not good enough? Emma asked. What if I fail and prove everyone right who said I'd never amount to anything? Linda was quiet for a moment. Emma, do you remember what you were like when you first came to live with us? You were so angry and defensive because you'd been let down so many times. You were convinced that Carlos and I would eventually give up on you too. Emma remembered. She had spent the first 6 months with Linda and Carlos waiting for them to decide she was too much trouble, too different, too challenging. But you know what changed? Linda continued. You started to believe in yourself because you saw that we believed in you. And look what you accomplished. You got your GED, you've held down a steady job, you've built a life for yourself. You did all of that, Emma. Not us. But this is different, Emma protested. This is a corporate job. I don't know anything about business. You know about people, Linda said firmly. And from what you've told me about this Robert, it sounds like he needs someone who understands people more than he needs someone who understands spreadsheets. That evening, Emma walked home through the same streets where she had encountered Robert just 24 hours earlier. Everything looked the same, but she felt completely different. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her not just a job, but a career. Not just work, but the chance to make a real difference in other people's lives. As she passed the spot where Robert had been sitting, Emma made her decision. She pulled out her phone and called the number he had given her. Robert. It's Emma. I've been thinking about your offer, and I have some conditions. She could hear the smile in his voice. I'm listening. First, I want to start in an entry-level position and work my way up. I don't want anyone to think I got the job because of personal circumstances. I want to earn it. Agreed. What else? Second, I want to spend my first month shadowing different departments, learning how the company actually works from the ground up. I want to understand the business before I try to change anything. Smart approach. Continue. Third, I want to keep working at Morning Brew part-time until I'm sure this is going to work out. Mrs. Chen has been good to me, and I don't want to leave her short-staffed if I'm not successful at Harrison Industries. There was a pause, and Emma wondered if she was asking for too much. Emma, Robert said finally, do you realize what you just did? You just demonstrated exactly the kind of careful, thoughtful, ethical leadership that my company desperately needs. When can you start? Emma smiled, feeling more confident than she had in years. How about Monday? As she hung up the phone, Emma realized that this story wasn't really about a millionaire helping someone who had helped him. It was about two people who had found exactly what they needed in each other at exactly the right moment. Robert had needed someone to remind him what true generosity looked like, and Emma had needed someone to see her potential and give her a chance to prove herself. But most importantly, Emma had learned something about herself. She had always thought her greatest strength was her ability to help others. Now she understood that her real superpower was her capacity to see possibilities where others saw only problems. In other people, in difficult situations, and finally, in herself. 9 months later, Emma Martinez stood in the gleaming conference room on the 15th floor of the Harrison Industries building, looking out at the Portland skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. She was preparing for her presentation to the board of directors, a presentation that would determine whether her pilot program for employee engagement would be rolled out company-wide. The transformation in Emma's life had been remarkable, but it hadn't been easy. True to her word, she had started in an entry-level position as a human resources assistant, working her way through every department in the company. She had spent time with construction crews, learning about their safety concerns and workplace challenges. She had shadowed administrative assistants, understanding their frustrations with communication gaps between departments. She had even worked shifts with the janitorial staff, discovering that they had valuable insights about building efficiency that no one had ever bothered to ask them about. Throughout this process, Emma had continued working part-time at Morning Brew, maintaining her connection to Mrs. Chen and her regular customers. This had actually proven invaluable, as it kept her grounded in the real-world service skills that had impressed Robert in the first place. Robert had kept his word too. He hadn't given Emma special treatment or fast-tracked her promotion. Instead, He had provided her with resources, a business mentor, courses in corporate management, and most importantly, his trust and patience as she learned. The pilot program Emma was about to present had been her idea, born from her unique perspective as someone who had been overlooked and undervalued. She called it Every Voice Matters, and it was designed to create systematic ways for all employees, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy, to contribute ideas and feedback about improving operations. During the pilot phase, which had been implemented in 3 of Harrison Industries' construction projects, the program had yielded remarkable results. Employee satisfaction scores had increased by 40%, workplace safety incidents had decreased by 30%, and project efficiency had improved by 20%. But the numbers only told part of the story. Emma had documented dozens of stories like Miguel Santos, a construction worker who had suggested a simple modification to their supply chain process that ended up saving the company $15,000 per project. Or Jennifer Kim, an administrative assistant who had identified a communication bottleneck that was causing delays in permit approvals. Or David Washington, a security guard whose observations about building traffic patterns had led to a redesign that improved both security and employee flow. These aren't just statistics, Emma had told Robert during their preparation meetings. These are people who went from feeling invisible to feeling valued. And when people feel valued, they do their best work. As Emma reviewed her notes one final time, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared young woman who had given away her last loaf of bread 6 months ago could never have imagined standing in a corporate boardroom, preparing to present a company-wide initiative to a group of executives. But Emma had learned that transformation wasn't just about changing circumstances. It was about changing how you saw yourself and how others saw you. She had always been intelligent, resourceful, and caring. The only thing that had changed was that someone had finally given her an opportunity to use those qualities in a bigger arena. The board meeting went better than Emma had dared to hope. The executives were impressed not just with the results of her pilot program, but with her comprehensive understanding of how it would scale across the company's various divisions. They asked tough questions, but Emma had anticipated most of them and had data-driven answers. At the end of her presentation, Board Chairman Patricia Williams asked the question Emma had been waiting for. Ms. Martinez, if we approve this program for company-wide implementation, are you prepared to take on the role of Director of Employee Engagement? Emma looked around the room at the faces of successful, powerful people who were waiting for her answer. 6 months ago, she would have been intimidated by their suits, their degrees, their obvious wealth and status. Now she saw them as people who were trusting her with something important. Yes, Emma said with quiet confidence. I'm ready. The vote was unanimous. After the meeting, Robert walked Emma back to her office, a real office with her name on the door, something she still marveled at every morning when she arrived at work. I'm proud of you, Robert said as they sat down in Emma's modest but comfortable workspace. But I'm not surprised. I knew from that first night that you had something special. Emma smiled, but her expression grew thoughtful. Robert, can I ask you something? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night? If I had just walked past you like everyone else? Robert considered this seriously. I think about that sometimes, he admitted. I probably would have eventually remembered who I was, gotten help, returned to my old life. But Emma, I don't think I would have learned what I needed to learn. Which was what? That success without compassion is hollow. That wealth without generosity is meaningless. That leadership without empathy is just management. Robert paused, looking out the window at the city below. I had built a successful company, but I hadn't built a company that made people's lives better. You showed me the difference. Emma nodded, understanding. You know, I used to think that helping people was just about giving them what they needed in the moment. Food, shelter, kindness. But this experience has taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is the chance to become who they're capable of being. Is that what you think I did for you? Robert asked. Emma shook her head. No, I think what you did was see who I already was and give me a place to show it. The person who gave you that bread, the person who's presenting programs to the board of directors, that's the same person. I just needed the right opportunity to let her shine. That evening, Emma stopped by Morning Brew on her way home. She still lived in the same small apartment, though she could afford better now. She had decided to save most of her increased income, remembering too well what it felt like to worry about rent money. Mrs. Chen greeted her warmly, as she did every evening when Emma stopped by after her corporate job. How did the big presentation go? They approved it, Emma said, unable to keep the excitement out of her voice. The program is going company-wide, and I'm going to be the director. Mrs. Chen beamed with pride. I always knew you were destined for great things. Even when you were just making coffee, you had that special way with people. Emma looked around the coffee shop that had been her second home for over 2 years. The familiar smell of roasted beans, the comfortable chatter of regular customers, the warmth that had nothing to do with the steam from the espresso machine. Mrs. Chen, I want you to know that even though I won't be working here anymore, this place will always be important to me. You took a chance on me when other employers wouldn't, and you treated me with respect when that wasn't always easy to find. Mrs. Chen patted Emma's hand affectionately. You earned that respect, dear. And you're going to do wonderful things in your new position. As Emma walked home that night, she took a slight detour to pass by the spot where she had first encountered Robert. It was just an ordinary corner now, bustling with evening commuters and shoppers. But for Emma, it would always be the place where her life had changed direction. She thought about the lesson she had learned that cold November evening, though she hadn't recognized it at the time. Kindness isn't about having enough to give. It's about giving what you can, when it matters most. Emma had given away her last piece of bread not because she was wealthy, but because she understood what hunger felt like. But she had also learned something else, something that had taken months to fully understand. Accepting help, accepting opportunity, accepting the chance to grow. That took just as much courage as giving help. Emma had spent so much of her life being the one who helped others that learning to let others help her had been its own kind of challenge. Now, as the newly appointed Director of Employee Engagement at Harrison Industries, Emma had plans. Big plans. She wanted to create mentorship programs that paired experienced workers with newcomers, regardless of their backgrounds or previous experience. She wanted to establish scholarship funds for employees who wanted to pursue additional education. She wanted to implement recognition programs that celebrated not just productivity, but kindness, innovation, and collaboration. Most importantly, she wanted to make sure that no one at Harrison Industries ever felt invisible or unheard, the way she had felt so many times in her life. 3 months into her new role as director, Emma received a letter that would become one of her most treasured possessions. It was from Maria Gonzalez, a janitor in one of their office buildings who had been with the company for 8 years. Dear Ms. Martinez, the letter read, I wanted to thank you for the suggestion box program and the monthly meetings where we can talk directly to management. Last week, I mentioned that the cleaning supplies we use could be less harsh and better for the environment. Today, Mr. Harrison himself came to thank me for the suggestion and told me they're switching to the products I recommended. In 8 years, no one had ever asked me what I thought about anything work-related. Now I feel like my opinion matters. Thank you for seeing us. Emma kept that letter in her desk drawer, and whenever she faced a particularly challenging day or difficult decision, she would read it again and remember why her work mattered. 6 months after her promotion, Emma decided it was time to give back in a more systematic way. She used her first significant bonus to establish the Second Chances Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping young adults aging out of the foster care system. The foundation provided job training, mentorship, and small grants to help cover basic expenses while people got established in their careers. Emma's story had gone from a personal triumph to a model that could help others facing similar challenges. But she was careful to make sure that the foundation wasn't about her. It was about the principle that everyone deserves an opportunity to show what they're capable of achieving. Robert often told people that hiring Emma Martinez was the best business decision he had ever made. Under her leadership, Harrison Industries had not only improved their employee satisfaction and retention rates, but they had also seen significant improvements in productivity, innovation, and their reputation in the community. But more than that, The company had developed a culture of mutual respect and collaboration that attracted top talent and made existing employees feel genuinely valued. Emma had proven that treating people well wasn't just morally right, it was good business. The story of Emma Martinez and Robert Harrison became something of a legend in Portland's business community, though both of them were careful not to let the attention go to their heads. When reporters asked Emma about her rags to riches transformation, she always corrected them. "This isn't about rags to riches," she would say. "This is about recognizing that everyone has riches inside them. Talents, insights, capacity for growth. Sometimes those riches are hidden by circumstances, by lack of opportunity, or by other people's limited expectations. But they're always there." Emma never forgot the lesson of that cold November evening, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the positive impact you have on other people's lives. She had given Robert her last piece of bread when she had nothing else to give, and in return, he had given her the chance to discover what she was truly capable of achieving. But perhaps the most important lesson was one that took Emma years to fully appreciate. The courage she had shown that night, the courage to help someone even when she couldn't afford to, was the same courage she needed to accept help when it was offered to her. Both giving and receiving required her to see beyond immediate circumstances to recognize the fundamental dignity and potential in every person she encountered. Today, Emma Martinez continues to work at Harrison Industries, where she has created programs that have been adopted by companies across the country. The Every Voice Matters initiative has become a model for inclusive workplace management, and Emma is frequently invited to speak at conferences about leadership, employee engagement, and the power of recognizing untapped potential. She still stops by Morning Brew every few weeks to visit Mrs. Chen and to remember where her journey began. She still lives modestly, though she could afford much more. And she still carries bread in her bag sometimes, just in case she encounters someone who needs it more than she does. Because Emma learned that success isn't about how much you accumulate for yourself. It's about how many people you help discover what they're capable of becoming. And that lesson, learned on a cold sidewalk in downtown Portland, continues to guide every decision she makes. The dwarf orphan who gave away her last piece of bread had found something more valuable than money. She had found her purpose. And in doing so, she had helped a millionaire find his purpose too. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen not when we change our circumstances, but when we choose to see the extraordinary potential in ordinary moments of human kindness.